And today, we are zeroing in on a particularly volatile section of the tournament. We are doing an album quest review of Round 2, Group 39.
Round 2 is important. It means these albums have already fought and won once. The stakes are higher, and the quality level is, supposed to be exceptionally high.
Yeah, the weak have been cold.
They have. And the official name the author gave this particular battlefield of sounds is just, it's fantastic.
It really tells the whole story before we even start.
It does. He calls it Once Upon a Time When Elton's Love and Big Country's Peace Were Dismantled by U2 and Simple Minds.
So the title itself is a spoiler. It tells you exactly who survived and who was left behind on the battlefield.
It lays it all out. But let's officially list the 4 contenders, because they're the ones entering the ring, ready to fight for those 2 spots in round 3.
Okay, who do we have?
First up, from the veterans of the 80s arena rock scene, we have Peace in Our Time by Big Country.
A huge fan favorite.
Then there's the compilation Curveball, Love Songs by Elton John.
A completely different vibe.
Completely. Then the atmospheric qualifier, Once Upon a Time by Simple Minds.
Another giant from the 80s.
And finally, representing a different century entirely, the 21st century champions, How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb by U2.
Wow. That grouping it's strange and wonderful. You've got pure 80s new wave rock going head-to-head with a late 90s soft rock compilation and a 2004 stadium rock revival album.
It's a proper clash of styles.
All right, let's unpack all of this. We need to get into the context and the stakes here, starting with, why round 2 is such a big deal.
We really can't stress this enough. Reaching round 2, it's significant. If you picture this whole tournament as a massive funnel, the vast majority of albums have already been discarded. They're gone.
So these 4 aren't just good albums.
No, not at all. They are survivors. Each one of them has already proven at least once that they possess more enduring subjective quality than 3 other records they were up against.
The bar has been raised. This phase isn't about tossing out the obvious filler albums anymore.
No, this is where it gets painful. It's about making agonizing decisions between excellent musical works. And to really appreciate the quality we're dealing with here, we need to look at the path they took. What obstacles did each of these albums have to overcome in round 1?
Good point. Let's start with the eventual winner of this group, U2's How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. How did it get here?
Well, it didn't just qualify. It dominated. It got first place in its group, which was round 1, group 154.
And who was in that group? I mean, the competition U2 faced there, that was pretty heavy, wasn't it? They didn't have an easy ride.
No, not at all. They beat Peter Gabriel's 4th self-titled album.
The one most people call Melt, with the scratchy cover, a classic.
That's the one. They also beat Yes's progressive rock masterpiece, Fragile.
Okay, another giant.
But here's the kicker. Most importantly, they beat one of the absolute foundational goth rock albums of the late 80s, Disintegration by The Cure.
Wow, okay, hold on. Disintegration, that's not just an album. For a whole generation of people, that album defines an era.
It absolutely is. It's widely considered The Cure's artistic peak. I mean, it's a masterclass in atmospheric density and, pure emotional weight.
So for a U2 album from 2004 to claim first place ahead of Disintegration, a record with this multi-generational canonical status that immediately establishes How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb as an extremely powerful contender in this whole quest.
It really does. It sends a signal that this specific U2 album possesses an almost irresistible quality for the author. It's a monster.
So U2 made a huge statement. What about Simple Minds? Their path was a bit quieter, but it was just as challenging, right?
It was. Their album, Once Upon a Time, it qualified by taking second place in its group, round 1, group 42.
So they didn't win their group?
No, but they survived. And that's what matters. They qualified behind Foreigner's Agent Provocateur, which, that speaks to the strength of classic 80s rock in this whole quest.
So who did they beat to get that second spot?
They managed to hold off 2 real heavy hitters of commercially successful pop rock. Sheryl Crow's Best Of collection and Don Henley's incredibly polished album Building the Perfect Beast.
That's a tough field. Henley's album especially was everywhere.
It was. So Simple Minds proved their enduring artistic integrity against a field that was maybe more focused on, pure radio polish. They earned that spot.
Yeah, for what really feels like the emotional center of this entire album quest review. Big Country's Peace in Our Time. This album also secured a first-place finish its initial contest, right? In round 1, group 90.
It was an emphatic win, and Big Country defeated a really fascinating blend of international pop and critical darlings.
Like who?
They beat Clan Ed's Celtic pop compilation legend, They beat Madonna's era-defining hits collection, the Immaculate Collection.
Wait, they beat the Immaculate Collection. That's huge. That's one of the best-selling compilations of all time.
It is. And on top of that, they also beat the highly lauded alternative rock record, Woodface by Crowded House.
So ranking above Madonna's greatest hits and a beloved record like Woodface, that really highlights the intense personal conviction and the quality the author originally assigned to this specific big country album.
It shows you just how high this album was on a pedestal for him.
Okay, finally, we have the statistical outlier in this group, Elton John's Love Songs. It's a compilation, not a cohesive studio statement, but it also won its group. First place in round one, group 89.
And that, for me, is maybe the most surprising round one result of the four.
Why is that?
Well, compilations, they face a unique struggle, right? They often lack the cohesion, the single artistic vision of a studio album, but Love Songs defeated a really diverse field.
Who are they up against?
The pop record Angels with Dirty Faces by the Sugar Babes, the ska pop compilation Divine Madness by Madness, and the super polished 80s rock of Four by Huey Lewis and the News.
So the sheer quality and, I guess, the ubiquity of Elton John's Dalladry was just enough to carry it to victory in that initial, very mixed group.
It was. The classic songs just powered through.
Okay, so we have four formidable proven albums meeting in group 39. The stage is set for a high-quality ranking, and the author's immediate reaction to the final result tells us everything we need to know about the emotional impact of what happened.
Oh, it does. The ranking produced an elimination so jarring, so out of the blue for him, that the author instantly labeled it the biggest shock of round two so far.
And we know which album suffered that fate. It was Big Country's beloved Peace in Our Time.
The one that was so highly rated.
Gone. That designation. Biggest shock. That demands some serious consideration. I mean, this quest has already seen plenty of controversial exits, right? We know the author had to deal with the elimination of some other genre giants just before this group came up.
He did, yeah. He specifically mentioned having to endure the recent massacring of classic Foreigner albums Head Games and Four.
Oh, fantastic records.
And the painful elimination of Howard Jones's seminal synth pop album Humans Lib in the group that came immediately before this one. Those were significant cuts. Big losses.
So for the Big Country elimination to register as an even bigger shock, it means the emotional resonance of that album, for him, it must have far exceeded even those classic 80s records.
I think you're right. It suggests that this isn't just about musical quality anymore. It's about watching a piece of your own personal history get relegated.
Yeah. The shock implies this profound dissonance between his current, objective ranking mind and his past emotional listening self.
Precisely. And this necessary internal conflict, it leads us perfectly into our next section where we really have to analyze this loss against the backdrop of the author's evolving musical journey.
Right. Okay, so let's go back in time. We need to introduce this element of historical comparison. We can do that using the author's, I guess you'd call it an archaic website, Vote World, which dates all the way back to 2002.
It's a digital fossil.
It is. But it allows us to measure how personal taste can morph over 2 decades, especially when you're exposed to a much wider universe of music.
And Vote World, in all its early 2000s glory, it represents the author's baseline taste, his starting point. And this is the critical detail, the absolute core of the shock. In 2002, Big Country's Peace in Our Time wasn't just a well-liked album for him.
It was more than that.
It was listed in his top 10 albums of all time.
Top 10. Let's just let that sink in for a moment.
It's huge.
An album that was number 7 on a Lifetime personal list 20 years ago has just been eliminated in a mid-level tournament round, ranked 3rd out of 4. That is the definition of a monumental demotion. How does the author even begin to reconcile that?
He shows some pretty admirable self-awareness, actually. He just comes right out and says that the 2002 list was compiled by an immature early 20s graduate who had barely listened to 20% of the music I'm now familiar with.
That's a key admission.
It's central to the entire quest's premise. Rankings that you compile when you're young, when you're an enthusiastic fan, they are fundamentally limited by your exposure.
That is a universal truth for any passionate music listener. Your first list of favorites is often dominated by the albums that served as your gateway drugs, the music that just blew your mind right when you started seriously paying attention.
Of course.
But as your sonic vocabulary expands, you get into jazz, world music, classical, deep cuts, stuff from earlier decades. Those initial impactful albums, they have to defend their positions against a far richer, more sophisticated canon of music.
And that defense is exactly what Peace in Our Time failed to execute here. It was powerful enough to win in round one, sure. But round two demanded this enduring structural quality that transcended that initial impact.
And while the complete original Vote World Top 10 list is unfortunately lost to the sands of time.
And a lack of internet archiving back then.
Right. We can reconstruct some of the known elements, which gives us some really rich context for what kind of music the author privileged back in 2002.
We do know that Pink Floyd was dominant. They held the top two spots. It was either a momentary lapse of reason or The Wall at number 1 and 2.
So complex, a little bit melancholic, progressive rock was clearly the pinnacle of his early taste.
It was the gold standard for him.
And what other heavy hitters likely occupied those highly prized top 10 spots alongside Big Country?
Well, the author recalls being pretty sure the list was heavily saturated with 80s albums that have that certain atmospheric, sophisticated sheen.
Like what?
Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, Paul Simon's rhythmically revolutionary Graceland, Peter Gabriel's super polished,
all untouchable classic.
Right. And Fleetwood Mac's production masterpiece, Tango in the Night, and Mike Oldfield's evocative album, Sirius.
So we're talking about albums that are critically acclaimed, impeccably produced, and often defined by synthesizers and these really expansive soundscapes.
Yes, and that aligns perfectly with the aesthetic of Peace in Our Time. Big Country wasn't some weird outlier in that 2002 list. It was actually a perfect fit for that mature, big 80s sound.
That makes sense.
And the possible inclusions, the ones he's not 100% sure on, they just solidify this preference even more. He thinks Clutching at Straws by Marillion was probably on there.
Great album.
And significantly, Simple Minds' Street Fighting Years. And this is key because if Simple Minds had been represented in this group by Street Fighting Years, an album the author potentially rated even higher than Peace in Our Time 20 years ago, the results of Group 39 might have been completely different.
But that's not what happened. The reality is that Simple Minds is here with Once Upon a Time, which the author ultimately ranked higher than the Big Country album. So the big question remains, why did Peace in Our Time suffer such a dramatic, shocking fall from grace?
The author's conclusion is it's pragmatic and it's a little painful. He says that while the Big Country album is still objectively a decent album with quality songs, the element that once defined it, the production, that unique sound of the late 80s, has just lost its luster.
It's aged.
It just doesn't sound as fresh as it did when he first heard it, probably around 1988 or 1989.
That's a fascinating distinction to make. It's not the songwriting, it's the sound. The specific sonic texture of the drums, the mixing, the effects. That's what aged poorly, not necessarily the underlying structure of the song.
Exactly. The songs are decent, but they're now draped in the sonic fashion of a bygone era. And upon repeated listening, that fashion just feels dated compared to truly timeless compositions.
You've just hit on the core mechanism of the demotion. And now we have to move on and test that theory by putting Big Country directly up against its 80s rock contemporaries, the ones who did manage to survive this critical aging process, Simple Minds and U2.
The ones that made it through.
So let's define this cohort first. What is it that unites these three albums, regardless of where they ended up in the final ranking?
They're all unified as compatriots and pioneers of that big mid-80s arena rock sound. They all use massive reverb, layered instrumentation, and a powerful dynamic range that was literally designed to fill stadiums.
They share sonic DNA.
They do, but U2 and Simple Minds achieved far more commercial success than Big Country, which maybe gave them a wider critical and historical safety net to fall back on.
That's a fair point. Okay, let's start with the eliminated favorite, Big Country's Peace in Our Time, and conduct a little post-mortem analysis. Where did it still shine? What were its strengths?
Well, musically, the author confirms that Big Country was at the absolute peak of its technical powers on this record. The album has superb production, it's rich, it's layered, it's clear, and the arrangements are really intricate.
And there's a specific technical point he praises, isn't there?
Yes, the impressive percussion work.
Okay, I want to focus on that detail for a moment. In 1988, having impressive percussion often meant you were using the latest in digital drums, and you'd mastered that huge gated reverb sound that completely defined the era.
The Phil Collins sound.
Exactly. Now, if Big Country shares this impressive percussion detail with the Simple Minds album, what's the difference in execution? Why did one age better than the other?
That's the subtlety of it. Both albums use huge drums, absolutely. But Big Country's drums might lean a little heavier into the pure, fashionable 80s boom, which is precisely the element that can quickly date a record once that fashion passes.
It becomes a sonic timestamp.
It does. Simple Minds, on the other hand, seems to use rhythm more as a foundation for a kind of trance-like atmosphere. The rhythm section becomes a texture, not the dominant sound effect.
Okay, that makes sense. Looking at the tracks of the Big Country album, which songs retained enough power to remind the author why this was once a top 10 entry for him?
The album opens really strong, and that first trio of songs still holds up as solid rock writing. King of Emotion, Breakin' Heart, 13 Valleys, and 1,000 Yards Stare.
All great tracks.
And beyond that, the two strongest, most enduring pieces of material in the whole record are identified as River of Hope and Time for Leaving. So those 5 tracks are the ones that fought hardest for the album's survival.
But the elimination confirms that 5 strong tracks just weren't enough to carry the weight of the tracks that had, jaded over time. Which songs dragged Peace in Our Time down?
He singles out the title track itself, Peace in Our Time, and another track, I Could Be Happy Here, as the two that have jaded a bit down the years.
And when an album is fighting 2 high-caliber opponents like these, even 2 or 3 slightly stale tracks are enough to sink the whole ship.
That's all it takes. It suggests that maybe the optimism or the specific arrangement choices on those tracks now feel less vibrant, maybe even a little forced when you compare them to the effortless flow of the Simple Minds or U2 records.
It's that moment you realize the quality is merely good when you once thought it was masterpiece. A tough realization.
It is.
But before we leave Big Country, we have to acknowledge the high compliment they received from the winner of this very group.
Yes, it's a lovely note of respect, actually. The Edge, U2's guitarist, was a known admirer of the late Stuart Adamson's unique guitar playing and his really profound songwriting.
And there's that great quote.
The Edge famously said of Adamson that he had a heart as big as a mountain, and that is immense respect from one arena rock pioneer to another.
It's a real testament to Adamson's talent, even if the author feels his very best guitar work, like the unforgettable lines on Look Away and Save Me, aren't actually on the specific album.
Exactly. The ultimate conclusion for Big Country is that they were at the peak of their production skills, but their work here was just slightly less enduring than the powerhouses they were competing against.
A victim of rising standards, both in the tournament and in the author's own personal canon.
That's it, in a nutshell.
Okay, now let's turn to the nuanced qualifier, the one that managed to claim that second spot. Simple Minds, Once Upon a Time.
Right. So the author expresses a bit of surprise that this is actually their 7th studio album. This isn't an early effort. By the time this album came out, Simple Minds was a well-oiled machine operating at peak professionalism.
And of course, it contains the era-defining, massive stadium anthem, Alive and Kicking.
The big one.
But relying purely on Alive and Kicking wouldn't be enough to secure a round 3 spot. What is the fundamental musical difference that made Simple Minds endure where Big Country faltered?
It all comes down to the structure of the music. Simple Minds material, particularly on this record, is less about that immediate melodic payoff and more about creating an atmosphere.
How so?
The author describes the music as not hitting you with immediate hooks, but rather slowly wrapping itself around your senses over the course of weeks or months.
That's a perfect description of music that uses texture and repetition to create a sort of trance state.
It is.
How does that happen compositionally? What are they doing?
It means that on the initial listen, you might not be grabbed by a chorus that's demanding radio play. But the repeating bass lines, the echoing synth pads, the driving rhythms, they all work on a deeper, more subconscious level.
It seeps in.
It does. The author notes that your mind is slowly immersed until the composition just feels irresistible. He says he feels like he's physically inhaling and ingesting sporadic pieces of their arrangement during many of your waking hours.
That's incredible. It suggests the tracks are less about big, catchy melodies and are far more nuanced, relying on a kind of rhythmic and textural hypnotism.
That's it.
Can you give us some specific track examples that illustrate this process?
Look at tracks like All the Things She Says and I Wish You Were Here. They're not traditional pop songs. They build slowly, they introduce elements methodically. They are anthemic for sure, but they are far more nuanced than just big arena melodies and choruses.
So they succeed because they create an experience, a total sound world, not just a 3-minute single.
Exactly. And the vocal work is absolutely integral to holding that texture together, isn't it?
It has to be.
Jim Kerr's voice is essential. It holds that complex soundscape together. His vocal quality is praised for containing great personality and texture. He's not just singing the tune. He's serving as a narrator within this immersive sonic environment he's helped create.
So you combine this structural complexity, the strong vocal personality, and that impressive percussion we already mentioned.
And Once Upon a Time proves its deep, enduring quality. It earned its qualification. It deserved to go through.
All right. Now for the top contender, the group winner. U2's How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, an album from 2004, a full 2 decades after its main competitors here, and yet it takes the crown. Why?
U2 won because, according to the author, the material is simply top-notch from back to front. This album succeeded because it managed to sound both classic and modern at the same time.
Which is the magic trick, really.
It is. Unlike the Big Country album, which sounded slightly dated, How to Dismantle sounded revitalized and absolutely urgent.
And when we talk about U2, we have to talk about the edge. The author highlights a specific sonic detail about his performance here.
He does, and the description is so tactile and vibrant. He says, the Edge's guitar sound sizzles and sparkles all over this record.
That's not just a generic compliment.
No, it speaks to a specific production choice. They chose to give his signature delay and chime incredible clarity and presence, especially in the high frequencies. The guitar isn't just playing notes, it's coloring and charging the entire atmosphere with energy. It cuts through the mix with this bright, undeniable texture.
It sounds alive.
It does, and stylistically, this album is a real balancing act. It had to satisfy both the nostalgia craving and the demand for innovation.
So how did it pull that off?
It's a beautiful tightrope walk. The album consciously harks back to their iconic mid-'80s style, that stadium-filling sound of the Joshua Tree, but it integrates these really interesting sonic innovations that prevent it from just feeling like a retread.
So it's familiar but new.
It successfully married their classic sound with contemporary production techniques, making it sound relevant in 2004 and, crucially for this, still relevant today in the quest.
And this victory, it carries high personal stakes for the author, right? In terms of rankings.
It really does. He places this album extremely high in U2's. Let's face it, pretty polarizing catalog. He calls it one of his favorite U2 albums and says it's potentially their best work other than the Joshua Tree.
That is a massive endorsement.
It is. So for U2, this wasn't just a win in a tournament. It was a validation of their late career artistry, being able to stand toe-to-toe with and ultimately defeat the powerful nostalgia surrounding these classic 80s acts.
Okay, so in the 80s rock showdown, U2 wins with vibrant, revitalized energy. Simple Minds qualifies with this structural, atmospheric nuance. And Big Country, despite its pedigree, is relegated by dated elements.
A tough but fair fight.
Now we have to turn to the complete wild card in all of this, Elton John's love songs.
Yes. This album exists on a totally different plane from the other 3 arena rock bands. Elton John is a musical titan. He's a legend whose peak commercial success came in the 70s.
I mean, when Big Country and Simple Minds were still finding their feet, Elton was already playing sold-out global arenas.
Exactly. But his fundamental musical identity is so complex and often really non-anthemic, which makes placing him against these rock giants very tricky.
That's the key contextual point the author makes, isn't it? He says the bulk of Elton's best material is anything but anthemic.
He does. His style is best described as this dynamic mix of a boogie rock neroler with a splash of progressive rock and a penchant for a powerful rock ballad. He's all over the map in the best way.
And the specific album competing here, Love Songs, is a compilation from the 90s that just isolates one part of that, the balladry facet of his long career.
Yeah.
How does that isolation impact its performance in the quest?
Well, it both helps and it hurts it. It helps because it showcases his undeniable world-class talent for crafting these perfect soft rock ballads and pop hits. It's an easy listen, and it's just full of recognizable quality.
But the downside?
The downside is that by excluding his rockier, boogie-woogie side, his dynamism, it presents only one softer dimension of who he is as an artist. And that makes it a difficult competitor against the relentless energy of the 80s rock albums in this group.
But still, the collection is filled with enduring classics. Let's list the specific gems that were fighting for its survival.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a masterclass in elegant songwriting. You've got beautiful, timeless songs like Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word, the emotionally potent I've Seen That Movie Too,
A personal favorite of mine.
the ubiquitous Candle in the Wind, and the reflective We All Fall in Love Sometimes. He describes them as delightful little ditties, which I think really conveys their melodic charm and their soft strength.
So if the quality of the songwriting is that high, why did this compilation rank lowest? Why was it eliminated in fourth place? We need the precise critique that justifies that decision.
The critique breaks down into two specific areas, and they both revolve around pace and comparison. First, there's the issue of repetition and length on some tracks. The track, Are You Ready for Love, while a perfectly fine song, is judged by the author to be way too long or repetitive.
In a competition focused on sustained quality from start to finish, that lack of efficiency costs you points.
It does. And the second point, the comparison to its peers in the group, which must have been devastating for it.
This is the real killer.
It was the final nail in the coffin. Other tracks on the compilation, like Warm Love and A Cold World, are deemed dull next to the exciting and dynamic Once Upon a Time and How to Dismantle.
And that's the core subjective truth of the ranking right there.
It is. When you put it into a head-to-head competition against records that thrive on complexity, texture, and dynamism, the softer, more repetitive tracks on love songs simply fade into the background.
That's a tough, almost cruel, critical measure, isn't it? To say that Elton John's ballads are dull is a massive subjective leap, but it highlights the nature of this quest. It's a subjective ranking based on what holds your attention, on momentum and energy.
It's a critical risk, for sure. And the author acknowledges this wryly. He jokes that this opinion is likely to get him slapped out of any Elton John fan club meetup.
I can imagine.
He confirms his subjective bias. He just says, compared to the thrilling soundscapes of Simple Minds or the charged guitars of U2, the softer tracks on the compilation lack the dynamism required to qualify. They just couldn't compete on that level.
And he gets that perfect little self-referential moment in there too, doesn't he?
He does. He pauses and says he would apologize, but that's the hardest word, right?
A perfect, if a little painful, sign-off for the eliminated album.
Yep. So Love Songs is out. But we should note, as the author does, that this isn't the final curtain for Sir Elton in the overall quest.
He's still in the game.
He still has one album safely qualified for round 3, Tumbleweed Connection. However, the author quickly dampens expectations, noting that Tumbleweed Connection kind of limped through a fairly mediocre group.
So the writing might be on the wall. It suggests that even Elton's more cohesive studio work might struggle significantly later on in the quest, when it's faced with true canonical masterpieces.
I think that's a very real possibility.
Okay, we have dissected the battle, the personal history, and the musical merits of all 4 of these contenders. I think it's time for the final verdict and the synthesis.
Let's do it. Let's summarize the ultimate outcome of round 2, group 39. This was a critical group. It tested the endurance of personal favorites against revitalized rock quality and atmospheric complexity. A real clash.
And the 2 albums that have proven their mettle and now move forward to the challenges of round 3 are.
In first place, How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb by U2. The clear winner, moving on confidently.
And in second.
In second place, Once Upon a Time by Simple Minds. The nuanced qualifier, surviving by the skin of its atmospheric teeth.
And the 2 albums that are now eliminated, ending their journey in the album quest for good.
In third place, Peace in Our Time by Big Country. The biggest shock elimination of the round, without a doubt.
And in fourth.
And in fourth place, Love Songs by Elton John. The unfortunate casualty of competing against pure arena dynamism.
The overriding takeaway here for the entire album quest, it seems, is this constant tension between initial emotional impact and enduring musical strength. And that tension is defined by the author's own evolving taste.
Absolutely. Big Country's album was, by all accounts, superb. It had excellent orchestration, peak production for its time. It was a beloved album. But the author's maturity and wider exposure over 2 decades revealed that the initial freshness had worn off on some crucial tracks.
The sound had dated.
It had. It relegated it from a top 10 masterpiece to a mid-tier elimination.
And what supplanted it was sheer dynamism. The top 2 contenders won through contrasting but equally compelling forms of energy.
That's right. U2 provided a vibrant, energized return to form with the Edge's sizzling guitar work, while Simple Minds delivered a more subtle yet powerful structural immersion that slowly wraps itself around your senses, defying the need for quick-fix melodies.
It's proof that in this quest, albums are judged not just on absolute quality, but on the enduring relevance of their sound, surviving the scrutiny of time and extensive re-listening.
And ultimately, the high quality of the top 2 it laid peace in our time to rest.
A compelling and, for some fans out there, probably a very painful result. And that brings us to the close of this analysis of Round 2, Group 79.
We've successfully charted a very specific, very emotional section of the album quest, diving deep into the evolution of personal tastes, the mechanics of high-stakes tournament survival, and specific musical critiques across these contrasting rock genres.
Now, as is tradition, we want to leave you with a final thought to reflect upon as you consider your own musical canon. The elimination of Big Country's piece in our time was the biggest shock because back in 2002, it was the author's personal #7 album on his Vote World Top 10 list.
So if that album, one of his all-time favorites, was eliminated by U2's How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb and Simple Minds' Once Upon a Time, we have to turn that critical lens back onto the rest of that recalled 2002 Top 10 list.
Think about those other sophisticated atmospheric 80s albums that once dominated the author's heart. Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, Paul Simon's Graceland, Peter Gabriel's Somme, or even the Pink Floyd records, Momentary Lapse and The Wall.
If those albums were suddenly placed in a group with this U2 album and the Simple Minds album today, which of them, built on that same high-quality 80s aesthetic, which of them would survive this stage of the competition, and which might suffer the same shocking demotion as Big Country?
It's a thought experiment that really forces you to question the stability of your own favorites, what endures the test of decades, and what was just great at the time.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us.
And see you next time on The Quest.